Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So now we've come upon 1994 and 1995, two particularly reliable years for Asian horror in my opinion. Now of the 11 films that I covered from 1990 and 1991, I only enjoyed 5 of them. Of the 10 films I covered from 1992 and 1993, I only enjoyed 5 of them. However, of the 14 films that I will cover from 1994 and 1995, I enjoyed 12 of them. That's a darn good success percentage if you ask me. That's not to say that all these films are masterpieces, but there are a number of interesting flicks from these particular years. And since we are covering more movies in this video when compared to the last few, we better get started here. Now this is probably going to be a little bit of a longer video, just so you know, so I recommend that you pause the video now, okay, go brew some delicious coffee, unwrap some high quality chocolate, which is one of my personal favorite treats, or even better, break out some of your Japanese or Taiwanese whiskey you've been holding on to. Get settled in. And don't forget, the titles for all of the movies I discuss are listed in the description box below. Now for 1994, I have only seen 3 Asian horror films from that particular year. But the difference in quality of these films is rather huge. So we begin with the worst one, and to no one's surprise, it is yet another entry in the Shake, Rattle, and Roll franchise. That's Shake, Rattle, and Roll 5, 1994 Filipino horror anthology. This franchise just continues to disappoint me. This installment, like its predecessors, consists of 3 short films. So let's just get into the plot synopses for all of them and get those out of the way first, and then I'll give some overall thoughts to all 3 films. So in Maligno, a couple takes a vacation on a secluded island, but strange forces are at work that seem to keep them there. The second film is called Anino. A ghost monster hybrid sets its sights on a family of siblings. And the third film is Impacto. 2 siblings are kidnapped, but accidentally taken to a feeding ground of a monster. So this anthology has the major flaw that tends to pop up in weaker Asian horror films, and that is dull filler. Alright, people in this film, they just kind of sit around, they talk about stuff that's not particularly interesting, and then a few forgettable horror sequences are chucked in here and there in an attempt to keep the viewer awake. But it doesn't really work well. The scare tactics during the first 2 segments are so muted and I guess you could call them weak. They just have zero impact at all. You know, for a horror film, they just they leave no impression at all. The third segment has more effective horror content, but is crippled by 2 obnoxious protagonists. So, yeah, another shake, rattle, and roll film that I simply cannot recommend. Sorry. But luckily, our next film is a huge improvement over the last one, and that is Red to Kill, 1994, a Hong Kong thriller horror hybrid. Now in this film, a sadistic murderer rapist targets a mentally handicapped girl in this notorious Category 3 shocker. So this film is actually not the most well-known Cat 3 movie, but in my opinion, it probably should be, because it's just so offensive on so many levels. I mean, how many times have you seen graphic rape and violence inflicted upon a mentally handicapped protagonist? It's brutal stuff here. In this type of film, okay, the portrayal of the killer is of paramount importance, and Ben Ing plays a convincing lunatic while at the same time avoiding a descent into silly annoyance. So this actor, Ben Ing, appeared in a good number of films when I looked at his filmography on IMDb, but Red to Kill is by far his most impressive and powerful performance, at least from the films that I've seen. I mean, if you thought Anthony Wong was good in The Untold Story, check this guy out. I prefer this guy's performance. It's really good stuff. Now, in typical Cat 3 fashion, there are a few disturbing rape scenes to endure, as well as some dramatically unsettling moments of self-reflection by the lead protagonist. So it shows, I remember one scene, I'm not going to spoil it. Actually, the most shocking scene for me in this movie wasn't even a violent scene or a rape scene. It was like, it was a scene of self-reflection by this girl after she really realizes what has happened to her. And it's just not easy to sit through. Good moment, though, I guess I could say. Now, the final showdown is a true classic in terms of sheer violence. People get thrown around, it gets bloody and nasty. Red to Kill is seriously depraved, but it's also a well-made, thrilling experience. I highly recommend this. And on my Category 3 list of favorites, this one's in the upper echelon, I think. Definitely recommend Red to Kill. Now, the availability of Red to Kill, it used to be very highly available on DVD, but now a newer copy is overly expensive. You might be able to find a used copy at a more reasonable price, but it's also on YouTube, I believe. I haven't seen the whole movie on YouTube, so I'm not sure if it's cut or anything or what the quality's like, but I did find it on YouTube when I checked the other day. So that's an option for you. Red to Kill. Yeah, that one's definitely one to check out. And now, of course, we hit our last film from 1994, which might be even better than Red to Kill overall. And it's also an entirely different beast in its own right. So you have, a pretty crappy anthology to start 1994, real nasty but good quality Cat 3 film, and now we get to this film, which is kind of a creepy avant-garde film. And that film is called Angel Dust, a Japanese thriller horror hybrid. Again, we're in 1994. So in this film, a lady detective tries to stop a serial killer who murders in public places with a poisonous syringe, in this film by Sogo Ishii. Now, this director, Sogo Ishii, if you're unfamiliar with him, he directed a handful of films during the late 70s and early 80s that were very influential to other Japanese directors. I think, it's a possibility that Shinya Tsukamoto was influenced by Sogo's works. I think I read that somewhere. There's definitely a number of Japanese directors who really look up to Sogo's earlier work. His most popular film in the West is probably Electric Dragon 80,000 Volts from 2001, which is a real crazy cyberpunk comedy, which I'm sure to review at some point in a separate video on this YouTube channel. This just gives you a feel for Sogo Ishii. Not a big-name guy in the West, but he has had a pretty significant influence on Japanese directors. So you got a guy who can bring some quality, and he definitely brings in an Angel Dust, which, in my opinion, is his best film. So in terms of Angel Dust, there are a number of plot lines and themes explored here. Okay, there's the typical investigation, which I outlined. There's the detective's very unorthodox romantic relationships, which are, some of the, intimate scenes that are portrayed here are kind of odd. She's got some odd fetishes here. And then also, there's a mental brainwashing aspect that's really interesting and actually adds a lot of the creepiness to the proceedings. But I think the most amazing element in this film is the expert blend of camera work, very high-quality camera work, scoring, editing, and set designs that plunge the viewer into an almost hypnotic mental state, thereby creating a very unusual level of surrealistic discomfort. So obviously a name that comes to mind would be David Lynch when you think of a film like this, but I think this film is better than most of Lynch's. It's very, very proficient and deliberately paced, but very proficient and well executed. So some of the events are very enigmatic and mysterious. You may not understand every little thing when the film ends, but that will likely provoke you to watch the film. Watch the film again at a later time. See if you can figure out some of the meanings of some of these odd scenes that are peppered in. Again, pacing is very slow here, and the horror elements are rather light. Again, this is kind of a thriller, a slow burn thriller horror hybrid. So you're not going to get a lot in terms of visceral horror like you get from, Red to Kill or something like that. But if you're interested in creepy, weird, mesmerizing cinema, I say you should definitely watch this. I've actually only seen this film one time, even though it's in my collection, and I'm definitely going to watch it again, because it certainly left an impression on me. Definitely recommend this one. Now, DVD availability of Angel Dust, just like Red to Kill, used to be highly available. Now it's kind of overly expensive new. Look for it used, but Angel Dust is also on YouTube, so same situation as Red to Kill. Angel Dust is one that a lot of people don't know about, but I think it should be more well known for sure. So now we move on to 1995. And in 1995, there's actually only one Asian horror film that I did not like from this year, from what I've seen, and it's not even that bad. And that film is called Ghostly Bus, a Hong Kong horror romance. Now, a pickpocket played by the always welcome Simon Yam attempts to find his dead wife on a ghost bus. Alright? So this starts off fairly well, with a decent introduction to the ghost bus, as well as one particularly cool pickpocket scene. But the middle parts, unfortunately, consists of very boring filler material, and the ending is very average at best. You know, this is one of those films that just gradually loses its momentum, even after it gets off to a pretty good start, and because it loses momentum, it starts to lose the viewer's interest. One other big negative that I had is that the actual core romantic relationship in this film, it feels very weak. You know, it doesn't really feel like it's interestingly developed, and it's kind of hard to really care about the core romance here, which is important for this particular film. So, you know, Ghostly Bus isn't a bad flick, but I can't recommend it. Not with so many other interesting films released in this particular year. So let's move on here. And the first interesting film that we will cover from 1995 is a film called Iko Iko Azarak, Wizard of Darkness, Japanese horror flick. So this is about a high school girl named Misa who arrives at her new school just as it is falling under an evil supernatural force. So trying to figure out who's behind the supernatural attack, she's also trying to deal with assumptions by her fellow classmates that believe that she is the one who is behind it all. Because, you know, they think it's this not a coincidence that she shows up and all these problems start happening. You know, so she's got a few different things to deal with here. So overall, I think this is an entertaining film that does have its fair share of flaws, unfortunately. So it does implement some very interesting concepts, like high school black magic. This movie is still slightly disappointing because the protagonist witch has very weak powers. You know, she doesn't really step up to the plate and really throw down at any point in this film. Maybe a little bit towards the end, but there are also a few gratuitous lesbian sex scenes that just like come out of nowhere and seem to add nothing to the story. I was kind of surprised when I was seeing this. I'm like, what is this? So that I didn't really find that to be a positive here, unfortunately. But still, there are some very good death scenes. There's one actually right near the beginning of the movie, if I remember correctly, that's very cool. And quite enough blood to keep things moving. There's also an over-the-top lunatic schoolgirl who shows up at one point who's a highlight. I liked her a lot, too. So this film has enough positives to outweigh the negatives. And overall, I liked it. Every once in a while, I'll get the urge to rewatch this, so that must say something. So DVD availability of Iko Iko Azarak is that it's widely available on DVD. So it's out there for you. Alright, now the next film on this list is a much more obscure film. Much more obscure. But it's pretty good. And that is Anatomia Extinction, 1995 Japanese horror film. Now this was directed by Yoshihiro Nishimura, who is most well known for his more recent J-gore flicks, such as Tokyo Gore Police from 2008, which involve characters known as engineers, who are genetically modified supercriminals who can transform open body wounds into flesh metal weaponry. So Anatomia Extinction is a low-budget precursor to Tokyo Gore Police, by the same director, of course. But this one actually has an even greater emphasis on horror instead of kind of action. Because Tokyo Gore Police was, I think, definitely a horror film, but it was almost like a low-budget action film as well. And I kind of like the blend there, which made that movie so entertaining. And I will review that movie later on, much later on in this playlist. But this one, Anatomia Extinction, it doesn't have quite as much like action and fighting. It focuses more on the horror. So Anatomia Extinction itself, the story is very similar in some ways. It basically involves a salary man this time, okay, who gets infected by an engineer and begins to kill people. But the style here, one thing I kind of observed is that the overall style of this film, which was obviously made in the mid-90s, was partially influenced, I believe, by Shinya Tsukamoto's Tetsuo films. There's some shots in here where I'm like, wow, that kind of reminds me of Tetsuo a little bit. There's also a brief nod to Death Race 2000, if you've ever seen that movie. And there's a nod to that, which is pretty cool. Like Tokyo Gore Police, this one's a bit on the perverted side. And it has some blankly comic news broadcasts and some mutant body weaponry and gore to enjoy. So again, if you've seen Tokyo Gore Police, you know what to expect here. But this film is an even lower budget of Tokyo Gore Police. So I would almost lower your expectations a little bit if you really liked Tokyo Gore Police when you watch this one. It's also a little less extreme. But it's still a cool movie, and it clocks in at about 50 minutes, so it moves by very briskly. I recommend this. Anatomia Extinction, or Anatomia Extinction, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Unfortunately, it's difficult to find, but, seek it out if you're interested. Next film on our list. All right, we get a sequel. And, one thing I've noticed is that Asian horror movies, there's a lot of sequels out there for Asian horror that are better than the original films. Maybe that'll be a topic for a future video at some point. But when I look at my list, every once in a while a discussion board will have a topic that'll say, what are the rare horror sequels that are better than the originals? And I look at my Asian list and I'm like, wow, there's actually quite a few. And this one that we're covering next is another one. And that is All Night Long 2, Atrocity, 1995, from Japan. Now, a passive high school boy is bullied by his classmates and forced to watch degenerate acts of humiliation and violence. Now, I covered the first installment of the All Night Long series in my last video, and, while not a terrible film by any means, I stated that I found it to be, not entirely, convincing in the performances and overall kind of mediocre. Well, this film, Atrocity, is a sick, nasty film that I think is better than its predecessor in all aspects. It has better bloodletting, more disturbing bloodletting, much better acting, I think, and the ending is more satisfying. So the climax is particularly nasty, and also, as I said, oddly satisfying from the viewer's perspective, given what occurs before it. So, in some sense, that must mean that there's some kind of dramatic content or dramatic value to this film. But if it does exist, it operates on a very primal level. I mean, this is practically an exploitation film. It's very basic, and it's just nasty in its violence. Not for the squeamish, but I recommend it if you're into this type of thing. Now, All Night Long 2, Atrocity, availability, actually, this entire trilogy, the All Night Long trilogy, is available on DVD, widely available in a box set. I think you could pick it up on Amazon. So if you're into kind of nasty stuff, even though I didn't recommend the first film, I know some people like it. If you like this type of thing, pick up the trilogy set if you could get it at a reasonable price. And one of the other interesting things for Asian horror is this right here. We now transition from a completely reprehensible horror film to a much lighter horror film starring grammar school children. And this is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time, because there's not a bad movie in this franchise. And that is the Gakko no Kaidan, also known as Haunted School franchise. The first film, released in 1995, this is a Japanese horror flick. So a group of grammar school kids get trapped in a haunted section of their school. So this is the first of 4 films in the Gakko no Kaidan film series. There are not many good quality horror films out there that are family friendly and involve grammar school kids. I mean, there might be a few you can think of, but it's not really a very popular or widely produced subgenre of horror, which is kind of disappointing, because this franchise proves that when it's done well, it can be very entertaining. And this particular franchise, in my opinion, is very valuable and even somewhat special to me, because it's kind of different, and it does different things quite well. Now there are a number of fun scenes in this first installment. There's like a roaming soccer ball scene. There's a giant schoolgirl, which is just really cool to look at, actually. A foggy floor with grabby hands. A saluting statue scene, and there's a scene where like gravity is inverted in a classroom, which is pretty cool. Special effects are surprisingly good in places here. Really, like I said, the giant schoolgirl scene, I was like, wow, that actually looks pretty realistic. The character development and storyline are maybe a little bit on the bland side, but still good. Characters are likable. Definitely an enjoyable and reliable option in terms of family-friendly horror. Personally, I enjoyed all of the sequels a little bit more than the first one, but I recommend this. So, right off the bat, I'll just give you information here. You can watch these films in any order. So if you can't find one, but you can find another one, feel free to pick up whatever ones you can pick up, because they have independent storylines. Even though some of the storylines are similar, they're independent. You can watch them in any order. Just an FYI. So Gakko no Kaidan is widely available on Region 2 Japanese DVD, but that would not have subtitles with it, which is okay. The version I have doesn't have subtitles, and I watch it, fairly frequently. It's a fun movie to watch even without subs. All right, next film here. We now transition back to reprehensible horror film. Another reprehensible one. Yet again, we're hitting a nice variety of Asian horror, though, right? So this film is called Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case. What a title. 1995, Japanese exploitation horror drama hybrid. Now this film, unbelievably, is actually based on a true story of a 16-year-old high school girl who was abducted, tortured, raped, and murdered during a 44 days of captivity. So based on detailed reports, this seems to be a fairly accurate reenactment, and actually has some supporting narration in the film. So it gets fairly nasty in terms of violence and rape, but the aspect that makes this film actually kind of interesting to watch is the Yakuza-driven fear and intimidation from the kids that results in inaction by people who could have helped. So I think these kids are somehow tied, either their older siblings, or somehow they're tied to the Yakuza. And because of that, some of the residents in this apartment complex knew what was happening, but didn't help because they feared retribution by the criminals, which just makes it just even more reprehensible, right? That this actually happened. But, the performance by the lead actress here is actually quite good. And the way they portray her, it makes you feel sorry for the girl. And it has a certain emotional impact. It's definitely an effective downer of a film that, to me, personally feels a little bit more than simple exploitation. But the viewer will need a strong stomach to make it through this one. You might be surprised to know that the Japanese released 3 films based on this real-life event. To my knowledge, there might be more, but I think there's only 3. But this one, in my opinion, is the most impressive because it actually extracted some genuine emotion from me, and I just found it to be, because a film like this, man, you're using a real-life event. It's almost like, what, are you really exploiting this event to make money? And that's kind of the first thing you think of. But I just felt like the film had a certain quality to it that I liked. So, I give it a pass on that. Now, I am going to cover the other 2 films in this playlist, one of which is, in fact, downright offensive in how it exploits a young girl's demise. So, I could draw the comparisons there. This film, Concrete Encased High School Girl Murder Case, not available with subtitles, I don't believe. And let's see here. It is difficult to find. I'm sure I saw it streaming. It might have been on YouTube, but if you're interested in this type of kind of macabre content, you might want to check it out or seek it out. Put it on your list for future reference. I think it's pretty good. All right, now the next film in our list is actually the first in the popular Ring franchise. But wait, Eric, you must say, Hideo Nakata's film was released in 1998, and that was the first one, right? Nope, that is not correct. I'm sorry. There was one movie that predated Nakata's, so, I'm trying to think if there was actually any more, but this is the one that I know about. There was at least one film that predated Nakata's, and that film is Ringu Kanzen-ban from 1995, Japanese horror flick. Now, this was actually made for television, this film, and was the first to explore the Ring mythos. In fact, it is based on the same book as the 1998 film. It does play out in a similar fashion, but it's also different enough to warrant a viewing. There are a few surprises to be had, especially if you've already seen Nakata's version. So you might be expecting, the typical thing to happen. You would expect this film to mirror the 1988 version, but it diverges at certain points. The videotape itself is very different and lengthy, not quite as creepy as you might expect in this case. Overall, though, this does have a tone that is consistently serious. However, it does, I think, lack the deep, ominous fear of Nakata's version. I think his style infused a real dread that Ringu Kanzen-ban doesn't quite match, but this is still a good flick. Pacing is a bit on the slow side, and, the finale isn't as terrifying, but I think the reason for that is that the ghost is far more humanized here. You don't get the girl with the long hair over her eyes. You don't get that here. The ghost is very humanized, and even though it kind of maybe takes away from the creepiness of it, it gives its own little contribution there. Not a must-see, I don't think, by any means. I mean, if you're a big hardcore Ring fan, maybe you'll want to seek it out. And if you just want a pretty good horror movie, it's a good horror movie. So you want to see the Ring mythos kind of interpreted in a little bit of a different, maybe more dramatic way, this could be for you. Definitely a little bit of a softer story in this franchise, but it's worth a watch. So Ringu Kanzen-ban, difficult to find, unfortunately. But now you know about it. Next film here is a film called Hanako, Phantom of the Toilet, also known as School Mystery. I think it's also known as Hanako-san, 1995 Japanese horror. So set in an elementary school again. We have another elementary school film, 2 in the same year. A girl is rumored to be possessed by Hanako, the legendary ghost that lives in bathrooms. I've said it before in this video, and I'll say it again. There are not many quality horror films that revolve around grammar school kids, so you have to appreciate them when we find them, and this is a good one. The tone is a little bit more dark than the mostly playful Gakko no Kaidan films, which gives this film some bite, given the fact that the protagonists are little kids. Pacing is rather nice, with an atmospheric and creepy execution. There is much conflict between the children themselves, actually, which adds kind of an interesting dramatic element to it. And the finale is different from what you might expect. So it's, this is a pretty good, I would say, it's a pretty serious, it takes itself seriously. It doesn't just go goofy and wacky and, just because it has kids in it. There's some good stuff here. It's worth watching. Hanako, Phantom of the Toilet. I believe it's available on YouTube under the title Hanako-san, but you got to kind of be careful on year of release because there's been a handful of Hanako films that have been released over the past, 20 plus years. Some of them have like similar titles, so just be careful. Make sure the one you're watching is from the mid-90s and you should be okay. Alright. Now our next film is a welcome callback to those crazy Hong Kong sorcery flicks from the 80s. We always like those, right? That film is Eternal Evil of Asia, 1995 Hong Kong horror comedy. So this is a crazy Category 3 sorcery flick with lots of spell casting, bloody deaths, and sexual content. There's a woodland sorcery duel, a hungry ghost scene, and a final confrontation, which proved to be the most memorable moments. It's almost like the overall plot of this film doesn't even matter, so I'm not even going to give you a plot synopsis, because it's, Hong Kong sorcery, if you've seen some of my other videos, you know what to expect at this point. Pacing here is pretty fast, not much in the way of dullness. The humor is effectively blended in with the horror scenes, and the lead actress is very hot, too, for the guys out there. This is good stuff. So, our last Category 3 film we covered was Red to Kill, which is real mean-spirited. But Eternal Evil of Asia is simply more, genuinely fun to watch. It's not really that disturbing. You just have fun watching it. So you can see that even if we restrict ourselves to Category 3 films, there's still a nice variety to discover. So remember this. Okay, remember this the next time you hear someone complain that Asian horror lacks variety. Even if you narrow down to a subgenre, you still get a nice variety there. Just want to point that out. So Eternal Evil of Asia. Okay, it's, again, just like Red to Kill and Angel Dust used to be highly available. Now it's overly expensive new. So look for a used copy. Or, let's see here, is it available on YouTube? It is on YouTube, so hey, it gives you some options. Alright, so now we're down to really the nitty-gritty in 1995. We're down to 2 more movies, and arguably, these are the best 2 films from 1995. I know some people, there's some big fans of Eternal Evil of Asia out there, some big fans of All Night Long too, even the Gakko no Kaidan. But these 2 are probably my personal favorites of this particular year. Alright, so now the first one is an extremely notorious film. Extremely notorious. That is practically a must-see for fans of excessive bloodletting. Alright, so that film is Naked Blood, 1995 Japanese horror. An amateur scientist decides to test his newly developed anesthesia drug on 3 schoolgirls without their knowledge, which unfortunately leads to psychologically induced, deep-seated masochism. So this was directed by our good friend Hisayasu Sato, who previously made a similar precursor film named Pleasure Kill from 1987, which we previously covered. Now, Naked Blood is the more extreme of the 2 versions, however. Now, the character interaction here is rather interesting, with some good dialogue, involving concepts like insomnia. There are also some cool images involving dreams and even a cactus plant. I think it's used as symbolism during a few moments. During the final half hour, there are some absolutely ghastly moments of self-mutilation, bodily fluids, and even tempura. The quality of the practical gore effects are no less than spectacular in this film, because much of the bloodletting looks incredibly real. So fans of such effects really need to see this one, because a few scenes are just jaw-droppingly impressive. I really have no idea how they did a few of these effects. In addition, the movie's style and execution lifted above your typical gore fest. It's Hisayasu Sato. This guy's got talent. He isn't your typical B-movie gore director. He brings more to the table here. And this is probably his most famous film in the West. And in some ways, I think it's kind of warranted. This one is real. This one brings the heat, man. So if you like your gore in movies with kind of like some weird, it also has kind of a weird art house vibe to it too. So you kind of get a few different elements here. Gotta recommend Naked Blood, man. Got to. Some people will have trouble sitting through it, though, just due to the violence. So this film is widely available, fortunately, so have at it. And finally, our final film here, our last film in 1995. So technically, using my new ordering strategy, this should be my favorite Asian horror film of the year. And I would say that it probably is. Might not be a popular choice, though. You know, I could definitely see someone choosing Naked Blood or some of the other films, but I think the final film here is the one I was probably most impressed with overall. And that film is Kill Barbara with Panic, also known as Patayin sa Sindak si Barbara, 1995, a Filipino horror film. Taking the top spot? Well, I think so. Now, we covered the original film from 1974 in this playlist, so you're kind of familiar with the story, but I'll give you another quick rundown. So after her emotionally unstable sister's mysterious suicide, a woman returns home, but realizes that her sister haunts from the grave. So this 1995 version is the remake of the 1974 film, but I actually prefer this version. The performances, I think, are very good here, especially the actress who played the ghost. The human conflicts are also very effective in how they're developed. Horror sequences are diverse. All right, there's a terrifying doll, which is a highlight. And the ghost is more classical than most contemporary horror films. You know, again, a very humanized type ghost, which, you know, sometimes it works really well if you use that. Scoring is very good. I think this is a surprisingly solid and very entertaining kind of haunted house type movie. I think I reviewed it without subtitles, but that doesn't matter, man. There are some extensive plot summaries online, so just read one of those, you know what's going on. Kill Barbara with Panic, 1995. I really like this one. I've only seen it one time, so it might be interesting to see if it holds up as good as I saw it the first time, but based on my first impression, this one's my favorite. It is available on YouTube under its Filipino title without subtitles, so you'll have to look under Patayin sa Sindak si Barbara. I'll include that in the description box below, that title. Alright, so that's 1994 and 1995 for you. Yet again, we have a nice mix of different kinds of Asian horror films. You got some real nasty stuff, some all-time nasty stuff in this video that we've covered. Also some lighter films featuring grammar school kids, a teen witchcraft movie, weird avant-garde serial killer film, a precursor to Ring, etc. So, you know, be sure to check out any titles that sounded interesting to you. And be sure to join me in my next video when we explore Asian horror from 1996. And as always, see you next time.